Good evening. It being 6 p.m. on February 6th and a quorum being met, I will call to order this meeting of the Charter Review Committee. We'll start with the pledge of allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Welcome, folks. Before we get started here, I want to just make a quick announcement that at the top that I will have to step out for a couple of minutes in order to make a quick presentation to the select board, which is meeting down the hall. I've already alerted my very capable vice chair, Mr. Costello, and he's agreed to take over the reins while I step out. We have a number of guest speakers here tonight. In addition to some, I think, really outstanding discussion items. I want to start with a review of and approval of the minutes from our previous meeting on January 23rd, 2024. They are in your packet, and I believe Michelle sent those out last week as well. Folks may be wondering where Michelle is. She is in her office. She finds that she can more adequately work using the computer in there, so she is in the building and here to support us in case folks are wondering. Thank you as always, Michelle. We appreciate your work. Are there any amendments needed for the minutes from our January 23rd meeting? Hearing and seeing none, I'd like to get a motion to approve. Mr. Levin, to approve the minutes. Ms. Kavako, will you second?
Yes.
Excellent. A motion by Mr. Levin to approve the minutes and a second by Ms. Kavako. Any further discussion on the matter? Hearing and seeing none, Mr. Bolton, if you had a vote?
I would abstain.
You would abstain because you were not present. Excellent, thank you. Mr. Hanlon is not present tonight. Ms. Kavako?
Yes.
Were you here last meeting, Betty?
Yes.
Okay. Ms. Kavako votes yes. Mr. Costello?
Yes.
Mr. Hutchinson?
Yes.
Oh yeah, you were here. Mr. Waller?
Abstain.
Abstain. Mr. Levin?
Yes.
Mr. Pizer?
Yes.
Ms. Votrain?
Yes.
Mr. Zuccaroli?
Yes.
And I vote yes as well. The motion carries with 8 in favor and 1 abstention on this poll. All right, we have, as I said, a couple of guest speakers here tonight. I asked for Mr. Hartman to come and discuss the planning component of the executive branch, and I'm sure Mr. Bolton can also assist in this as the vice chair of the planning board. So I will turn things over to, well, I'll turn the gavel over to Mr. Costello, who has a point of order.
I just wanted to quickly, did you skip public comment? Is there anyone in the room?
I did again, yeah.
Anyone in the room that wants to speak?
Thank you for calling me on that. Is there a public comment? Anyone online? Very good. Thank you for that, Alan. I'm gonna hand the gavel over to you, and I'm gonna ask you to hand the floor over to Mr. Hartman, and I will return after I have my time with the select board.
Sounds good, sir. Mr. Hartman, you in a position to speak for the head of the table? What's best for you?
Whatever you want.
No, right there's fine. I think everyone will be able to see you fine.
So Lee Hartman, I'm the Director of Planning and Development for the town. So first I thought I'd just start and give a little overview of the department. And I always have to look around my office to do this, but we have a staff of 12 people. We provide staff support to the planning board, zoning board of appeals, historic district commission, affordable housing trust through community development, conservation commission. We do a fair amount of what I would call economic development work. And then also provide support to some degree or another to the open space committee. We had done the energy committee, but that's been transitioned. So a staff of 12, and then I just had a list: planning board, zoning board of appeals, conservation commission, historic district commission. There's a convention study group that we're involved in, the Affordable Housing Trust, the Open Space Committee, Land Use and Acquisitions Committee, the MVP, well, that's not so much anymore, the 5 Village Centers, Visitors Services Board, the Master Plan Committee, Keynes Committee, the Plymouth Regional Economic Development Foundation, the Old Colony Planning Council, the Plymouth Bay Cultural District, and the Graffiti Committee. So again, we provide a lot of staff support to a lot of different groups. So I just thought I'd talk about a couple things as it relates to the charter and just some of my thoughts about, the charter. So one of the things that I think kind of, there was a real focus in the past about the master plan and how it relates to private development. And I think from my point of view, I think it's kind of the opposite. I think the master plan should be describing the parameters for what your zoning is, not necessarily the opposite. So again, I think we're about to undertake a overhaul and a new master plan that we're starting tomorrow night. And I think the way the flow should be as it relates to private property, master plan talks about the things that we want in the community, the zoning follows, and the zoning is the tool you need to enact those things that are in the master plan. Whether it's a special permit issued by the zoning board or a variance, or a permit issued by Historic District Commission, Planning Board for subdivisions, those permits have very specific legal reasons to say yes or no to. So the master plan is helpful maybe when a board is making a decision, but really when it comes down to it, when you vote on a special permit, you have to comply or not comply with the standards that are set forth by the state. Again, I think looking at a master plan to tell us what that zoning should say is important. I think the other really important part, probably in my opinion, the most important part of the master plan is how the community makes decisions, whether that's capital outlay or other things that town meeting looks at. So I think it's more important for whether it's a department or a board or somebody going before town meeting, looking for an expenditure of funds to explain how those funds or how those decisions are being made are actually consistent with our plan. So again, I think that that's pretty important. The other thing I think for the charter, there was some discussion before about having an alternate member. Right now, the planning board has an alternate, but that alternate can only vote on special permits issued by the planning board. There are a whole range of things that the planning board does that, again, I think we could expand that. It would be nice to have that alternate. So it's an elected board, so you wouldn't want an alternate who's appointed to have the same authority as an elected member. But if they can, this alternate that we have now can vote on special permits, it would be nice to see that position also have the ability to vote on subdivision approvals, site plan reviews. So not necessarily setting policies or making decisions about zoning changes, but at least expanding the ability, just like the Conservation Commission, just like the Historic Commission, and just like the zoning board, where you have alternates who can step in if somebody's not able to make it to a meeting. So again, I think that's something that I see as being very valuable. The other thing that I think is important, especially now with 18 precincts, is looking at ways to streamline the permitting process. A couple of years ago, we had a couple of zoning articles. I got a little sick. The process almost put me in the hospital. Trying to go to 18 different, so you go to the planning board, you go to the select board, you go to advisory finance committee, the committee of precinct chairs, town meeting presentation, and now 18 caucuses all over the town. I think it's becoming harder and harder to actually run that gauntlet. And when you miss one, once you start going to some, people get upset because you didn't go to theirs. One of the thoughts I've had, and I've kind of tried to peddle it, is that, and maybe this is beyond the charter, but if the committee of precinct chairs have 2 informational meetings, one at Plymouth North High School, one at Plymouth South. 9 of the precincts also post their meetings for that same night. Presentations are made, the caucuses then break out into different classrooms. And then the same thing at Plymouth South. The other 9 caucuses are posted, presentations are made, And then the caucuses can then break out into their individual meetings. That way, we have two presentations, everybody gets the same information, and then the caucuses can still meet, but they all do it on the same night, instead of having us really try to do the best we can, which is now at 18 is impossible. The other thing that would help with is, there's a limit. Usually I like to focus on one article a year, because there's a limit to what we can actually physically do. And when you have more than one article, it becomes more and more difficult to actually get things done. So I think if there was a process that kind of streamlined that pre-town meeting activity, it could give us a little more, especially at a staff level, a little more flexibility to actually do more at each town meeting than trying to really control how many items we have. Because the other thing that often happens is, I get public hearing notices for planning board. We go through that process, we're scheduled, we make the presentations. Then I have to go through the same process for the budget. And then we have to go through the same process because petition articles typically come late. So it's not just one series of meetings, or if you have capital. So again, looking at ways to kind of streamline that, not so much with the finance committees, the select board, or the planning board, but how the caucuses do their business, I think would be a really important thing to consider. And the other thing I think that's important to always keep in mind, and again, this might be a little bit beyond the charter, is that what I have kind of always pushed with petitioned articles is that it's very difficult to try to help somebody with a petitioned article if it's either a concept or an idea or something that's poorly drafted, and it can take a huge amount of time and effort to try to get something right. So I've gone to the point where I say to people that if the planning board or the select board or the energy committee supports a petition article, then we can devote town resources, town money, town council into working with that. But if somebody just has a concept and there's no real buy-in from the rest of the world, it becomes a very difficult thing sometimes to start to try to help people through that process if there's really no support from some major board. So that was another thing that I thought was important to note. And then the last thing I'll say, and then happy to answer any questions, I see also on the agenda, the Plymouth Industrial Commission. That was available because there were federal grants available at one point, there was money made available. That commission has not met since I've been here. I started back here in 2002, I think. So again, if that's still in the charter, that's something I think that can be eliminated, that funding resource, and the reason to have that commission is no longer needed. So that is something that I don't see a lot of value to have still. And again, nobody has sat in that committee for over 20 years. So with that, I don't know, Steve, you have anything?
All right, I'll open up to questions. Mr. Hartman, anyone have a question? Mr. Hutchinson, go right ahead, sir.
Could you comment on special permit communities in the south of Plymouth vis-a-vis the focus of services required in the north?
What do you mean by that?
I mean, we supply our own
Yeah,
sewer and water. We, most of what, funding goes in, I think, for the town goes to the north.
yeah, so what the master plan does now, the master plan that we live under since 1980 says that we have 5 village centers.
Do you want to handle this in a master plan? Maybe this is a master plan
Yeah.
question.
I was just gonna ask you,
Yeah.
is this relevant to the charter?
Yeah,
How
I'm-
the charter may help the planning department? or
Yeah,
not?
I'm sorry.
No, if it is, go right ahead. I don't wanna.
No.
do that.
No,
Tomorrow.
you mentioned.
Tomorrow night.
Tomorrow night. All right.
Yeah,
So I guess the questions, at least as it pertains to this committee, if you have any questions with Mr. Hartman, how he uses the charter today, what he might like to see in the charter as a revision that would help him.
Nick, actually,
I have one of these.
Okay, go right ahead.
Enforcement, how do you, see the role of, planning department, planning board, in enforcement of, for example, special permits?
So we were recently fortunate to have a second town planner's position, so we have 2 town planners now. And the role of that position is mainly to look at enforcement. So I think we've done a good job with enforcement, and that's between the building department and the planning, and this position kind of works between the two. The problem is what used to happen is somebody show up and say, okay, I want my occupancy, then you pull out the book and stuff to look and say, well, did you do this? You were supposed to do it 6 months ago. It always got done, but it wasn't a good way. So right now, we have that position. I will tell you that when somebody chooses to break the law, it's a very expensive and very time-consuming process to try to bring them into compliance. So one of the issues that we've dealt with is on Old Sandwich Road, there's a buffer that was required in one of the neighborhoods. And people have gone in there and removed trees in that buffer, cut down trees, put in the amount of work and the legal efforts to try to enforce enforcement is very difficult. So enforcement's a challenge. I think we're better than ever. But again, I would say that if somebody chooses not to obey the laws, if a developer decides, if you have a bad developer, it just becomes much more difficult to try to have compliance. But I think, there's always room to improve, but we've done a better job.
Are there restrictions on our ability to do fines or other
Yeah,
things?
I was gonna
Yeah.
ask, what are your tools?
Yeah, so so in subdivisions, we hold money for a developer. If they fail to perform, we can take that money. Now, it's private property. It gets really complicated that if you have a developer fails, we take $100,000, $200,000 from them. It's now, how do we then hire somebody to go on private property? So it's a little difficult. But the bond, typically, my goal would be that if there's $100,000 worth of work to do, you hold 200. Somebody's always gonna be willing to come in and finish the project if they know there's money on the table. It doesn't always work. We've had a couple of really challenging projects. And then in a neighborhood like yours or the Pine Hills, if we get to a point where there's issues, we always have the ability to stop issuing building permits or occupancy permits too. And then there are fines. But I will tell you that, like I say, when you get to the point where it's either fines or legal action, it can take a long time and a lot of money.
Okay, thanks.
So
Anyone else? Go ahead,
when
Mr.
you
Miller.
withhold those occupancy in building, let's say the occupancy permit more than the building, then the onus falls on the developer to go challenge that in
Yeah.
court and take that, and then the town.
If they wanted to, yeah, I'm not even sure how they do that. The hard part about that is occupancies, and we do it. The hard part about that is typically when you're at that point, somebody has the PNS, somebody's locked into a mortgage, somebody's moving into their dream house, and now it can have huge financial consequences to the innocent buyer of the property. Building permits, there's usually not somebody in that position, but.
Unless they build, just keep building.
Any other questions? Go ahead, Mr. Pison, go right ahead, sir.
This is, if you would come to all of our meetings, you'd be bored because this is what I say each time. Is there something, I think there is there something in here that is unimportant? For example, is it necessary for the charter to include what the Department of Planning and Development is responsible for? Our beloved, at least by me, town manager, says that he's the one who's responsible for telling people, what to do and how to fashion the world. Could we leave those pieces out and not hurt the functioning of the town?
I would leave that to you. I don't know. That's probably more of a legal question too. I mean, to some degree, I would think you want a framework,
So you're talking about 13.2?
but
315-4?
313-2, for example, where it says the department shall be responsible and have the following duties. You have them because you said that they're there, and you have them because the town manager says to you that they're there.
Yeah, to the point unless you have a town manager who decides that master planning is no longer important, we should focus on it. I don't know. That just seems a little unusual. I think you want some kind of framework, especially for planning, maybe in DPW, it might be different in other departments, but.
Alan?
Back on Larry's comment.
Yes. Rob?
Thanks. Yeah, I thought you
Yeah,
had your
yeah.
back to the screen. Lee, these are all great suggestions. Would you be able to bullet point these and send them to Michelle as an email, and then we can consider them when we actually talk about this, because I think we're gonna get into the weeds if we start going through
Yep.
chapter and verse tonight.
Yep,
That
I'll be
would save
happy.
a lot of time tonight, yeah.
I'd be happy to do that. And just one other thing I forgot to mention. I'd like to point out that I have many bosses, and it's a very unusual position to be, because the town manager I report to, and I follow his direction. I follow the direction of the planning board, and to some degree, I follow the direction of the, select board. When a project comes in, I represent the property owners, I represent the developers, and to some degree, I represent, well, to a large degree, I represent the neighbors too. So it's a very unusual position that I'm in at times, especially if there's something contentious. And I would just point out now that the way the charter is written, the hiring and firing of a planning director is with veto power of the planning board. And that does give me a certain level of confidence that I've got to get a lot of people mad at me, before one person could just certainly say, no, that's not acceptable. If you don't do this, you're done. So I do like that protection. Now, certainly if there is some legal violation, that's separate, but I do like that protection that's in there that says, you know, you can say something, or you can take a stand for one board or another, and you don't have to be worried about, you know, being dismissed for it.
Yeah,
Betty, do you have a question?
thanks, yeah,
Oh,
a
I'm
bulleted
sorry, Rob,
list
go
would
ahead.
be really helpful.
No, go right ahead, Rob.
I was just saying a bulleted list would be really helpful about what your suggestions are. And if it's not on your list, then we'll just presume that it's not to be changed.
Okay.
Well, you
Thanks.
will.
Betty, do you have something, Betty?
You will.
Ms. Kavako, do you have anything?
Yep, I do.
Okay.
Quick question, well, more of a comment. And actually with kind of going on the back of what Larry said, I don't think there should be anything in the charter that gives any kind of direction, or even, you know, unfortunately, the protection of someone's employment or position. I mean, that really is a human resource function and the town manager. So I think that, you know, if we have it in for one person, position, department, we are going to have it in for every person, department, position. So I would suggest that we remove all of that type of things to anything that the charter says to, with that has anything to do with personnel or under an HR function or town manager.
Yeah, that same provision is in for the town manager. I think it's because.
I can
they're-
barely hear you, Lee, so I don't.
So the same provision is in for the town manager with the, well, I think that's a 4-0, but anyway, I think the difference is it's an elected board I report to, but again.
Well, no, you report to the town manager.
I report to the planning board too.
If no one else has
Well-
any further questions, I have a question. I'm gonna actually piggyback on what Mr. Pizer, Rob, and actually what Betty said. And you may not be familiar with it, but 315.4 lists the responsibilities. Mr. Pizer, do you have any copy of that?
I have it.
I was wondering, just because we have been going down through these separate subsections and altering them or continuing the way they are. I was wondering if you could read off those responsibilities and see if any of them are outdated, or if there's others that are in there that you think are not in there today that should be in there in the future if we decide to keep a list of items that you're responsible for.
Yeah, and when you look at the language and it talks about ensuring that each function is operating efficiently and in accordance with the applicable standards, that sounds a little over the top. But again, when I look at the main categories, it's all pretty consistent with what we do. Again, I think you guys have a bigger discussion about whether you think that's needed at all in any department, and I would reserve judgment on that.
But I can see historically, the way this committee has operated, that 315.4 would be something that we would go in and at least update.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
with your advice, I'd
I
like to
think
know,
some of the language is maybe a little more descriptive than it needs to be.
okay,
And even when you say make recommendations to town meeting, I do that usually on behalf of a board, not me personally. So those things I could see being eliminated. And again, I think it's more a style that if you decide that in every group, you're not gonna have any real description and leave it up to the town manager, then that should be the same with this department, but.
and you probably already answered this, but is there any task or responsibility you'd like added that with all your experience that the charter doesn't address today?
No, I think the difficult part is everyone,
He's found.
so I think the difficult part is, especially in Plymouth, that we're very geared towards volunteer committees. And for they all need some level of support or another to function. And so I think the difficult thing, as I read out that whole group that we support, that's the biggest challenge, is how you support so many different committees. Some we support with more staff, some with less, but I think as you think about what you do, each committee does put on a burden on various departments. And I think that's probably the biggest thing right now is the number of committees that we have that need either support or attendance at various meetings.
Okay, very good. Anyone have any questions before we let Mr. Before we let Lee head out for the night? Nothing?
Anything you wanted to add?
Well, there's certainly some things that we can always address. I mean,
You'll be able to bring.
yeah, we've talked about our generalized idea in terms of what we see the charter as being assigning responsibility rather than dictating methodology. That was sort of our approach. So I could see us legitimately, for example, you know, when you look at this, eliminating that list of what the planning department does, and actually at that point, insert the language about who the planning director is. I don't know why you need a separate section that says, this is the planning department, this is planning and community development. And then you have a section about the planning board, and then you have a separate section about the planning director. It's disjointed, et cetera. So the goal would be to try and create a section that describes your department, what it needs to, what responsibilities it must have, your position, what responsibilities you have, and again, with the understanding, as you say, that you wear many different hats, and we should be very cognizant of that, because that's an unusual circumstance in town. And then making sure, so I think for us, the best thing that we can do, that you can do, working for me, if you will, whatever, is to make sure that we have as good an understanding as to the department, because it is an unusual, because it is planning and community development. And we all think about the planning side, not necessarily about the community development side, and all of the roles that the department takes in that context as well.
And I think your point is a good one when we think about, we had the energy officer in my department. And so we did this and we said, we want to outline all the duties that energy officer now migrated to a different department. And so if that was in the charter, that would be confusing. So I think there's maybe some level of what happens. And again, different town managers have talked about removing conservation and putting that to a different group. So I see your point about maybe not being that specific about some of those things, because they can change from time to time.
Okay, Mr. Lawler, then Mr. Pizer, go right ahead, Mr. Lawler.
Thank you, Alan. Really, certainly, it must be very confusing for you. I mean, I know that you're appointed by the town manager. But as it goes on, you do have, many different, people and organizations that you report to.
Can't really hear him. Tim,
Sorry.
sorry.
That you report to. And it must be very difficult to have, many different bosses. And, I mean, you know, you've been around for a while. Is there any way that we could make things more effective for you?
No, I think the system works, and I can tell you, I started here as a town planner in 1987. I have never felt political pressure to do something or not do something. I have felt a lot of anger from people, whether they're elected, appointed, or residents or developers. But I've never really had ever a position where I felt politically there was pressure on me. It's more about how you balance all the competing interests in the community. I view my role really more as a mediator. I don't look at my job as to say yes or no. I'll listen to what maybe the planning board has concerns on, what a developer wants, what the residents want. And my job is, I think, more about trying to bring that consensus to people. And the comment, oftentimes I present to different planning organizations. And I say that when the developer says, I don't like it, but I can live with it. The planning board says, I don't like it, but I can live with it. And the neighbors say, I really don't like it, but I can live with it. When nobody's happy, but everybody can live with it, I've hit mediocre. I've done what a government should do. I've made nobody happy, but everybody can live with it. And again, I think that's often how I look at my role is, and it's not always successful, but.
I think that's the definition of consensus.
Yeah,
Yeah, that kind of answers where I was going. I mean, there's no one who knows it better than you,
well, thank you.
and, I respect that. Thank you.
Mr. Pizer, you're right ahead, sir.
Your phone keeps ringing, by the way.
No, I'm sorry.
We haven't made a decision as a group. But one of the ideas that seems to be floating among some of us is the idea of, in addition to having a charter, more stripped down, having a handbook. In other words, someone from the public wants, you know, it took me 20 years before I figured out what the planning board did as opposed to the zoning board of appeals. And that sort of thing. So when if you're going to look through here for some ideas, you might also say, this is not necessary for the charter, but it might be useful for the handbook. And if you could give us some heads up on that, that'd be super.
Very good. Mr. Hutchinson?
Just one more note, in this chapter, I think of the planning department as having two jobs. One is the master plan and the other is zoning. And, this chapter doesn't really emphasize, it nods at, the master plan, but zoning is equally important. And I think that maybe this section ought to be bolstered. I don't know, whether you might have suggestions for that?
Yeah, it's hard because it's historic district, historic preservation, it's open space, there's a lot of things.
Yeah, absolutely.
Mr. Zuccarello, do you have a question, sir?
No, I was just gonna suggest that we move it along. I think Lee does need to get to the select boards meeting. We do have another guest speaker. And Lee is gonna send us some of this in a
Yes.
bulleted, you know, he's gonna send us his suggestions. So I think, you know, one of the most prudent things to do is look at the suggestions that Lee sends us and then take our direction from that, rather than to try to like throw spaghetti at the wall and see what sticks right now. I think it'd be more prudent of us and certainly more time efficient if we just waited to see those suggestions and then talked about them then.
No, very good point. I appreciate that, but there, Mr. Golden has returned, so he may have had some questions that he would like to ask. Mr. Golden, you have any questions before we let Mr. Hartman go?
I'm good. I'll let you finish this up, Alan.
All right, if you're all set, Mr. Hartman,
All right.
thank you very much for
Thank you.
coming in. Appreciate your time. At this time, I'll turn it back over to the chair, Mr. Golden.
Thank you, Mr. Costello. I appreciate you taking the reins while I was out at another meeting. That is my last meeting aside from this meeting, so hopefully we'll get back on track here. Excellent. Thank you for being here, Lee. I'll turn things over now to our next speaker, Mr. Hampton Watkins, who's here to discuss another section of the executive board chapter, which regards the land use acquisition committee. So Mr. Watkins, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. I'm Hampton Watkins. I am a resident of 31 Cornishfield Road, and I am a member of the Land Use and Acquisition Committee. about 6 weeks, 2 months ago, the committee was approached by, Mr. Brindisi about assisting in evaluating the town's interest in and potential use for a parcel of land that was adjacent to the public library. And we felt as a committee a little bit uncomfortable because our mandate under the town charter is chapter lands. And so what we discussed at some length at our meetings was expanding that and how we might go about doing that. And so we're approaching the Charter Review Committee with a suggestion that in addition to the narrow scope of Chapter 61 lands, and when they become available, working with the town on evaluation, that we would act in other circumstances as requested by the town manager and select board with regard to acquisition of land. It's I think, a simple and straightforward request. We've discussed it, and in fact, the LUAC has indicated by vote of the majority, I think it was unanimous, that we would propose the language as I have sent to Charter Review and ask that you consider that for inclusion in 3-14-9, our mandate under the charter. I've talked to a couple of 3, maybe 4 members of the committee about it, and they seemed to think that it was a good idea, so I, at that point, felt that it was good to just bring it to the full committee. That's it.
Thank you,
Short,
Mr.
simple.
Just so folks are clear, Mr. Watkins is referring to 3-14-9. We're not gonna cover this and take a vote tonight, but just so that, for the benefit of those in the room and watching at home. 3-14-9 states that a land use and acquisition committee comprised of 7 members to act in an advisory capacity to the select board with respect to the acquisition of real estate by the town pursuant to the provisions of chapter 61 of general laws shall be appointed as follows. And it goes on to talk about the select board appointing 2, the planning board appointing 2 by the Concom, and 1 by the open space committee. Under the proposed language, we would additionally add, after chapter 61 of the general laws, we would insert the phrase, and in other instances as requested by the town manager or the select board. So their charge would remain the same in regards to chapter lands, but they would become an advisory board for the select board in other matters that the select board or the town manager deem their expertise necessary. Is that a good summation?
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman.
Excellent. I have Mr. Bulletin and Mr. Costello.
Oh, sorry. Not behind me.
Hampton, again, no problem with the expansion. I think it's good that we have the land use and acquisition committee consulted on whatever purchases the town wants to make. I think that's a great idea. So my question is there a specific reason that you think we need to specifically call chapter 61 in? Versus just simply saying that that there should be a committee that serves in an advisory to the select board with respect to the acquisition of real estate by the town. We can say pursuant to requests by the town manager or the select board.
The chapter 61 has very tight timelines associated with it. That I think was what part of the motivation for this relatively narrow scope was. And those timelines are such that the town clerk receives the notice, disperses it. We get it from the town manager, and there is very little breathing room. So I think that that was part of the reason that the original intent was formulated as it is. I don't have enough history to say otherwise, but that's my impression. In my note, Mr. Kaiser suggested that I search out a report that was commissioned many years ago. I went to Mr. Anderson, the town archivist. He looked for it, he can't find it as yet. I've gone to the library, I've tried to search it out there, so, I would very much personally like to have a better understanding of the original motivation. But I think that at this point, that was why chapter 61 was called out. I think that what I don't want to do, and I think the consensus of the committee is, we don't just want to go willy-nilly and step out of bounds on anything. We want to have, if this is what's needed, we'd like to have a mandate. You know,
If I could add to that, Mr. Bolton, I think, keeping the 61 language in there would require them to weigh in on all 61s, where if we strike the language, unless we're gonna change it to, encompass all land acquisitions without the, select board and town manager's request. I think we want them to weigh in on 61, and then anything else that the select board and the town manager wish them to discuss and render an opinion on. I think the alternative that's, I think, more in line with what you're saying is that we could simply strike any of the language that says pursuant to the provisions of chapter 61 of the general laws, and leave it as simply that they will act in an advisory capacity to the select board with respect to the acquisition of real estate by the town. So that would require them to do everything, but I guess my question is, do you folks want to do every acquisition or only 61 and those requested?
yeah, those where we are requested, and
Yep, you can ask Jimmy to speak as
I
well.
have another member of the LUAC here with me, Jenny Davis, and.
Come on up, Jimmy.
Can committee members
I'll
speak?
have you in just a minute. I have Mr. Costello, then Zuccaroli, then I'll come
Do
to
you want me to
Mark.
speak now or wait?
No, please go ahead.
Okay, I think why this came up, the primary thing, we want to keep the 61A because our committee plans to go out and look at land and talk with people that have hundreds of acres, you know, private people. So I think that's really important. I think the other thing is, we felt kind of awkward that the town manager had come to us, but it wasn't in our description. And we want to make sure that we're doing what we should do within our committee bounds. That was primarily,
Yes.
that's all.
Thanks,
Thank
Jimmy.
you.
Hold on. Mr. Bolton, do you have a follow-up?
Yeah, just. My thought was to say that the committee should do whatever land review the town wants it to do. So in other words, you wouldn't automatically have to do anything. You could do, if the town says, we'd like you to automatically review every chapter 61 conversion where the town has a right, then that would be part of your mandate. And then on top of that, well, in addition, here's a non-chapter 61 parcel we'd like you to look at. Again, because what the requirements of chapter 61 aren't going to change. And that's part of what we've talked about is we don't reference state statutes as much in our charter because we have to follow them regardless. So I'm just trying to come up with the best language because I want to accomplish exactly what it is you're saying, which is to say, I'd like the Land Use and Acquisition Committee, LUAC, to be able to do what it does automatically now, plus whatever else the town wants. And if the language that you propose is the best way to do it, that's great. If there's better language, I'm just trying to figure that out. But I want to accomplish your goal because I think it's a laudable one and I think it's an appropriate one.
Thanks.
Excellent.
If there's language, if there's wordsmithing to be done, I'll admit that I'm not the the best of wordsmiths, but I think that what I'm trying to convey is the intent and enough of a piece of language that would meet that intent.
Great, thank you.
Thank you. I have, Mr. Costello, Mr. Zuccaroli, Ms. Botrain, then Mr. Levin.
I'll be sort of quick. I'm actually a little embarrassed. I've never heard of this committee. I've never, at least to my knowledge, had any direct dealings with this
Right.
committee and town meeting or anything along those lines.
Maybe Larry can.
And maybe that's what you're talking to. Were you trying to find the origin of when this committee was started? Is that the report you're looking
Yeah.
for?
Please.
There, you should not have let Lee go.
Is that another thing he's responsible for?
Lee and I were on a TQM, Total Quality Management Committee, designed by the town manager of the time. And we went to various people and said, what land does the town own? Couldn't even get an answer to that. And brainstorming, we came up with Land Use and Acquisition Committee. My understanding is that it went great guns for 3 or 4 or 5 or 6 years, and then went into quiescence and disappeared. It was a committee appointed, I think, by the select board, and they stopped appointing people to the committee. So one might call, while what I say is true, I'm not sure that it affects this. This might be LUAC 2, Land Use and Acquisition Committee 2, because I'm not sure that there is a direct line connecting it to the original one.
Yeah, and I don't know if this is your experience, and I'll come back to you for a follow-up in a second, Alan, but I think that part of the reason it may have gone into quietness, I think is the word. Quiescence is what you said, in other communities that I work in, we've seen in recent years an explosion in the number of chapter land properties that are going for sale. So the chapter land program is designed to encourage people to keep their property forever in a preserved status. Well, as you all know, the real estate market is absolute bonkers right now. So it's even worth paying the back taxes at this point to sell your chapter land. I don't know if that's been your experience.
I have been on the committee now for probably 5 months.
Okay.
We all are, because it was almost defunct. It
Okay.
was just for John Hammond and no committee. I think COVID had a job on it, and the people that were on it were not committed to it.
Okay.
We have really a really strong committee now. And
This was actually my line of question, to be honest with you, is how long have you two members been on the committee? 5 months, you're telling me?
5 months.
I think
And so historically, is it common practice for the town manager to come to you to explore a parcel land?
we couldn't
It's just
answer
the
that,
first time it's ever happened.
because
And now let's finish up and I'll let
Yeah.
you, then you can,
I'll give you these.
I see this as redundant to the CPC or the CPA. And maybe it's not in all realms of it, but it seems to be that the CPA comes to us with 61
They do.
all the time. And maybe it goes through your old committee prior to your tenure, but I see it as a redundant committee, in my opinion. But go ahead.
I'll let you speak a second, Ginny, but I think the CPC's role is more to recommend a town meeting funding source for the purchase land. Whereas these folks are more geared towards, is it worth us purchasing and controlling this land? Is that fair?
Well, we're research. Remember, this committee has been reformed, so we're coming alive again. And we are now gonna be meeting here, correct? Cranberry Room, and we now have, Patrick Farrar will be coming to our meetings. Because at the last one, I heard a request, can we meet at town hall and can we have access? He has all kinds of maps and he's been working with Patrick. So when we have meetings, we will have these maps in front of us because we want to be aware of all of the land at 61A. Because, we've even met with like open space. Because we kind of overlap, and sometimes they don't have people to go out and look at land. So we put on our own folks and we can go out and have them look at land too. So, it's just to help us all in this huge town kind of be more aware of what's happening.
Right, I think that one of the things that we're trying to do is evaluate what would be the best and most appropriate use for parcels that are coming out of 61 for the town. Does the town feel like it would be a good use of its resources to acquire that? For example, if a parcel next to the parcel that has just been seeded by Makepeace at Red Brook for the new fire station there on Bourne Road. There's a parcel that's going to be at River Run and Bourne Road for a new fire station.
Right, that's the donated piece of land.
That's the donated piece of land.
So how does it, how does?
Go ahead.
I'm sorry.
If that parcel were to, if another piece of land behind it or beside it were to become available, as it comes out of 61, would that in fact be, should we go to public safety or should we go to the fire department? Certainly it should be brought to the attention of the town departments for their decision-making. That's just one example where land adjacent to town land, already owned town land, would be available for one use or another. It happens that, for example, if there's property that's in 61 that's adjacent to a school, is that something that we ought to act on? Those are the sorts of things
Okay, thank you.
we'd like to consider.
Do you have a follow-up, Alan?
I don't think it should be in tonight's thing. Let's get nothing with the charter.
Yeah.
Thank you very much for your information.
Sure.
Yeah.
We'll obviously discuss this, we'll discuss the language at length when we get to that section of the charter. But certainly if you have a follow-up.
I'm all set. Go right ahead.
I'll come to you in a minute, Joe. Mrs. Agroli, you had a comment or a question?
Yeah, I actually have a couple of. I actually have a couple of questions, and this is to help me to understand. First of all, what's chapter 61?
Yeah, chapter 61 is a clause in the general laws that allows municipal entities to place a lien against a property that is for agricultural use or horticultural use or forestry or recreational use. And in exchange for that, the property owner is taxed at a lower rate. So the town has additional protections if the person decides to change that. They have the right of first refusal if the person decides to sell and change its use. So for example, if you have a golf course that's classified under chapter 61B that's being sold to create a complex of condos, the town has the right to buy that parcel before a private developer. And that's what these folks are making recommendations to the select board about.
Examples are the entity land, huge.
Yeah,
61.
yeah,
That's just a big.
the whole tech property is mostly in chapter 61. Go ahead, a follow-up?
Thanks. Yeah. So, and I think my question was answered. But again, this is to help me understand. So I remember a couple of town meetings ago, there was a pretty lively debate about whether or not about who should accept or who could accept donated land. Should that be town meeting members or should that be the select board? Understanding that sometimes these come up in between town meetings and it would just be it would expedite the process of acquiring land. How would this, if this committee is advisory, how would the work of this committee help in the town acquiring land? Would it help to speed that process along? Is this solely for the purchase of land, or would this committee also make recommendations for accepting donated land as well? Did that make sense?
Yeah, no, it does make sense, and I think that the answer is that if the town manager asks the committee or the select board asks the committee to review the acceptance of donated land, it would be under this new language, if it's approved, then they would have the right to do so. I don't know if it would speed up the process. I think as it stands, town meeting is the one who still has to either accept or authorize purchase of land, so. I mean, we certainly could make a recommendation to the contrary. Town meeting would ultimately have to approve that, and given the conversation at the town meeting, that you referenced, I don't think that they'd be open to that. You know, the sort of process wise, the select board these folks are advisory to select board because the select board are the ones who are who are going through and looking at land purchases, going through the offer stage, the purchase and sales stage is ultimately approved by town meeting. But I mean, we obviously, the 162 of us who sit on town meeting can't do that negotiation piece. So that's why they're advisory to select board. I think one of the things that could influence the process more is if the select board brings these fine folks and or their recommendations forward at town meeting, that could help their case. Does that answer your questions, Rob?
It does, and it just brings one other. So then in our discussions, could it be possible that maybe we, or maybe this would be this would be something for the town manager to discuss with the committee. In the case of donated land, maybe the select board could accept that, but in the terms of a purchase, then that would need to go to town meeting. Does that?
Yeah,
Or
I
is
mean,
that, or would that differentiation be too complicated?
Meeting rejected.
Town meeting would still have to authorize that change, so yeah, to answer your question, yes, we could make that recommendation through the charter process. Town meeting would ultimately need to approve that recommendation. My personal opinion is that I don't think town meeting would accept it, but yes, we could absolutely have that discussion and make that as a recommendation.
Okay. Thank you.
Any other follow-up?
No, thank you very much.
Excellent, I have Ms. Votrain, Mr. Levin, and Mr. Hutchinson.
I have three questions, but two together. So why did the town manager come to your committee with the request when you're not authorized? And why didn't he go to the open space committee?
I think that the town manager, saw the title of the committee. And said, oh, this is the land use and acquisition committee.
Oh, he didn't know.
The town had been approached informally by the Library Foundation, Library Corporation, which owns the parcel at 126 South Street. The 3/4 acre parcel, it's not in chapter land, and he wanted to know if we would provide some ideas and input and sort of do the legwork of finding out what the intention of the sale was. We said, the chairman and I, John Hammond and I, met with Derek here, and he asked us to research and opine on what's going on. So we scheduled a call with the library with Kelsey Casey and Deb Etzel, and had a conversation with them, found out what was going on and addressed their interest issues, so on, and carried the information back. So I think that it's that kind of discussion that he would like to engage us on, in addition to vetting, or I'll even say pre-vetting chapter land, and sort of evaluating and prioritizing for various purposes, and having essentially file folders that say, oh, this parcel in chapter 61 today is coming up and available you know, when the clerk receives the notice, here, okay, this evaluation was done in 2022. Any changes? No. Here's what we believe the town should do. So it's that kind of, there's some instances when we can get ahead of things. For example, chapter lands, and there are others that are gonna be ad hoc requests.
I do believe
So
that
my
open
other
space
question
is
is-
tax
hold on.
lanes too, Martha. It's not, right, all of open space that they look at is land that's had been in tax, hasn't paid their taxes. I do believe that's what they deal with.
So my
I think it's to further answer your question though, Martha, the town manager is a highly engaged manager, and he doesn't like to make decisions in vacuum, so I think he was simply seeking the expertise of these folks. And because of that, this has spurred their committee to make a recommendation to us to expand their charge based on work that they're already doing. I'll give you another example of that. I chair the Memorials Advisory Committee, and that group has traditionally only looked at individual honorees. So someone gets a memorial bench out by the waterfront, after having passed away, because of their service to the community, just as an example. We have other folks in town who are looking for memorials to commemorate a space, like a defunct camp that meant a lot to people in town, or a group of individuals, for example, Irish immigrants who came, worked in our portage factory and, helped build up a section of town. So although that's not in the charge of the Memorials Advisory Committee, the town manager wants folks to have their day in front of a body that makes sense for them. So he's trying to delegate stuff out to the right bodies. And in fact, that's why I was presenting to the select board tonight, because we updated our policy to include those things. So this is just another opportunity to fill a need in the town.
So I do have another
Please go ahead.
question. So my other question is, have you discussed this with the Open Space Committee, and do they feel like they have too much work to do or not enough work to do? Like, what did they think of the fact that you received this request from town
Yes.
manager and they didn't, or,
They- Right.
what were their thoughts about that?
The last LUAC meeting, Steph Silva
Mhm.
was
The
there,
chair.
the chair of open space was there. Jenny has been attending open space committee meetings and contributing. They have been, as Jenny said, they have been focused on evaluating tax title properties, across town that are sitting in treasury for retitling for specific groups in town. For example, the Conservation Commission or affordable housing or whatever, other purpose. And they'll evaluate in their meetings, maybe half a dozen tax title properties, and say, okay, none of these or one of these we should recommend for such and such a purpose. If it's contiguous land, if it's got particular value for one purpose or another. So that's what they have been trying to do. And I think, I'm not certain, but I think that is a bit of a stretch of the open space scope, but they've been, like us, they've been asked to go beyond mandate and have been more than happy to do so, to help the town, to try and contribute their input as to what's best for us to make this a working and better community.
So I guess we want to make sure that if we're making a change, that it's in the best interest of the town of Plymouth as a
Right.
whole. And how these lands are addressed and researched. I was wondering if there was some problem, and that's why this
No,
change
we just
was
wanted to-
presented.
No, there,
Or
what,
if open space feels like they have way too much to do and,
They asked
They're-
us if we'd
they're-
actually help them look at land.
right,
We
and
plan to help
John-
them with it. That's
John-
what it's about.
So there's no turf war between you and open space?
Oh,
Not
no,
at
no,
Not
all.
concern?
No,
Yeah.
not at all.
John
Open
Hammond,
Space has a representative on this committee.
yeah, John Hammond our chair,
They're appointed.
Yes.
is on open
This committee.
space.
He's one of the
So-
reps. Later.
They have full knowledge.
Yeah, so we're working hand in glove.
and so at some point, the town manager would then be responsible for deciding which committee he goes to
No,
with a
No.
request.
because the open space goes after the tax lien properties.
But it
That's
says,
all they
I
want.
think it says here that, the change would involve,
Well, a tax
Simply
title property, a tax title
other
property is
instances.
already in the custody of the town, so
They're just.
we're not acquiring a parcel at that point in time. It's already in treasurer,
Okay.
the treasurer collector already possesses it. So that wouldn't represent a conflict.
And open space.
and that was property, the library property, obviously.
That is
owned by-
just their property, that's not in a tax lien or anything, it's just a piece of property that the library owned. And why was it for
Oh, but the
sale?
library is a different,
The library,
entity.
Library Foundation.
the library foundation is a separate corporate entity.
Town owned it, doesn't say that. Yeah, we all thought that it was owned by the town, but it isn't, nor is the library.
A follow-up, Martha?
no,
Town doesn't
thank
know
you,
that, Brian?
yeah, thank you.
Why don't we fix it?
Mr. Levin?
Oh, my word.
So to follow up on what Steve talked about is, should you be looking at, is there opportunities for other land that's not coming off of 61? I mean, there's all the different variations of 61 and the different lands. But should you guys be investigating other lands that people haven't gotten a tax break? And then you look at the law, there's very specific guidelines about how they have to calculate and pay back taxes if they want to either give it to you or they want to, as David said, try to sell it. But should we be, so I think what Steve is saying is, one, we're trying to get away from this referring to laws, because tomorrow they may make chapter 62, and then we'd have to change the charter. But the other question is, does that then allow you to look at other parts of the land that might become available to the town, that have nothing to do with tax abatement or anything like
I don't
that?
think we have to make it that complicated yet. I mean, do you?
And what my. I think that we we joined the committee because we thought that there was a need. I think that there were two committee members remaining from earlier appointments. So we filled out the committee, with appointments from conservation, the select board, and I don't recall, planning board.
You don't have anybody. in common.
Conservation.
So what
It's not-
we're trying to do is meet the town needs with regard to land use and acquisition, full stop. How we go about doing that, what I'm trying not to do is do a large rewrite of our current mandate. I'm simply trying to address the request that came to us and fold that in. So I'd be happy, like I said earlier, I'm not the most eloquent wordsmith. If there is a better way to state the intent, I'd be more than happy to work with any member of the committee here to do that, so that we come up with a good, solid piece that would allow us to meet the need. And if the town manager or the select board says, we'd like you to consider this or that or the other with regard to land use and acquisition, would be happy to do so.
So by your wording is you're basically saying we're focused on 61, but there's this kind of catch-all that says if somebody comes to us, in this case, the town manager, basically, this town is looking for these committees to do the work that we don't have people that are full-time employees to do. I mean, if we wanted full-time employees to do all this work, we would double or triple the size of the employment population. So the other question I have is, I'm just seeking out your opinion. Do you think that there's an overlap or redundancy or possibly a justification to combine the two committees, meaning the LUAC and the open space?
No, I
I-
didn't want to see that with you,
I,
just.
as a separation of they're performing a certain set of functions right now, and we're focused on a different set of functions. I think that it would be very much worthwhile to do a gap analysis to see if anything else is falling through the cracks, and that's probably best done by someone like Lee and Derek working together. And assign that specifically to one or the other. But at this point, like I said, I'm attending many of the open space committee meetings. Any of the open space committee members who want to come to us, Steph was there, John Hammond was with us every meeting. He's our chair. You know, I think that we're working great together right now. But if there are other things that need to be addressed.
In that area.
Yeah, in land use acquisition, open space, and other issues. I'll give you completely my opinion. We just had one member depart the committee for family reasons. What I would like to see would be the addition, if we could recruit someone to the land use and acquisition committee who's either a retired appraiser or a retired title examiner, or someone of that sort who has got deep experience. We already have 2 lawyers on the committee.
No, they're great. One of them is actually the clerk. I didn't have to be the secretary.
And so we, you know, if we could get capacity for people who are willing to volunteer and join with us, that would be a huge boost, I think, to the committee and to the town as a whole. If you know any retired assessors.
Thank you for answering.
Sure.
So I think, do you have a follow-up?
No, I'm all set.
So I think we're, as a group, recognizing that there is a great opportunity to work with this committee to expand its scope and perhaps even come up with some other ideas to strengthen the committee. Is there anyone who'd be interested in working with Mr. Watkins to craft language in advance of the meeting that we're going to review this at? Because I feel as though we're getting really caught up in the language. And in order to avoid that at our the next time we discuss this, I'd like to see some folks reach out and craft something to put before us.
There's also a conversation in town about the land banks, which involve funding, targeting, acquisition, and then permitting. And they would be in such a thing, such an institution, such an office would include all of us. And there would be places for open space to fit, places for acquisition to fit. I mean, you know, when such an office would be able to come together. I mean, I guess what I'm saying is that it might not be a good idea to spend a lot of time on fixing language here, if such an effort is gonna become successful.
Well, but even if it does, there's always a value to having an entity in town vetting things in the first instance. So what a great opportunity for LUAC to say, okay,
Yeah,
here's all of these properties, these 61s coming available. yeah, this is not one that's really right for open space. This is,
Great for development.
this is possibly good for development. This is possibly good for municipal use.
Mhm.
If the town's interested in municipal use, land bank, as we're envisioning it,
Exactly.
might be able to fund it, or affordable housing, and again, that would be working with, so. Land bank would be a funding source rather than necessarily doing the assessment. We would be doing an assessment, but we would do it based upon someone else's recommendation, so I see
We're
LUAC as
all
having
working
a.
together.
I see LUAC as actually having a great sort of initial starting point to do the initial assessment and then spread it out to the appropriate bodies. So I think there's a good value to that, and I'd be happy to volunteer to work with them.
Excellent. So, Mr. Bolton,
speech.
It's this nerd to buy lunch, I bought it last time.
so,
Just let him volunteer.
so Mr. Bolton has volunteered to work with the committee to come up with language. If there are any other interested parties, please reach out directly to Mr. Bolton. We will likely not review this for at least 2 additional meetings. So you do have a couple of weeks to reach out and do that work. And of course, if the work is not completed, we won't review until it's done.
I think.
We'll get there. No worries.
Excellent, very good. Mr. Hutchins, do you have a follow-up?
No.
Ginny, do
I
you
just
want to add to
wanted
that?
to share, because we are this committee of only 5 months, but very strong committee, I would say. That we are in a learning process, and we're so excited that we're gonna be meeting here. We're gonna have Peggy Farah, we're gonna be able to look, he has all these maps. So before we're working with phones and laptops.
Yeah.
So it's a learning process, and it's very, very exciting. And anybody is welcome to come to any of our meetings too, they're all open meetings.
Thanks, Ginny. Mr. Pizer, unless someone else raises their hand, you have the final word.
I'm so happy that you recognized Mr. Bolton before you recognized me. To prevent me from having to volunteer for that group. I think Steve will do a fine job. The 2 small, well, not small, for reasons I never understood, this mentions chapter 61. There is 61A and 61B, and either we have to describe
All 3.
the function of 61, 61A, and 61B, or we, I think, have to add 61A and 61B into this.
Yeah.
That's point number 1. Point number 2, and this is a question that you can come back to us, but I hope you'll think about this. What if someone came to you and said, boy, do we have a piece of land for you? Are you sure that you don't want the ability to deal with that question of whether this land is a good piece of land for the town without having to go to the town manager? You and Mr. Bolton can come up with the answer to that, but I think that you've excluded that. What you've said is you have to do this serpentine act. Maybe you want the power to recommend to the town manager or the select board without them initiating. Your choice, not mine. It occurred to me that was there.
Yes, and we talk about having the initiative, so that's an important, I don't know. You have the word,
Well,
but
yeah,
that's a
we all-
good point.
Good.
Yeah,
Excellent.
we talked about that.
Follow up, Mr. Pizer?
Done.
Anyone else? Excellent. Thank you folks for being here tonight. We appreciate it. We'll certainly bring this into consideration, and I look forward to seeing what you folks come up with Mr. Bolton.
Terrific.
Thank you.
Thank you very
Thank
much.
you, guys.
Thank you.
Nice meeting.
All right, moving on in our agenda, I'd like to look at a couple of what I hope deeply will be quick conversations. Mr. Zubaroli, would you mind sharing the document?
You optimistic.
Famous last words. Section 3-11, which will be up in just a moment, describes does not describe the development and industrial commission. 3-11 has the header of development and industrial commission, and then no body So I would like to entertain a motion, because I don't think we should design such a commission. I would like to take a motion to eliminate section 3-11.
I would be delighted to make such a motion.
Mr. Pizer makes the motion, and I'll note here as well that, Mr. Bulletin, is now a full member, acting as a full member in the absence of, Mr. Lawler, who had to exit the meeting. Mr. Pizer has made a motion to eliminate section 3-11. Is there a second? Mr. Hutchinson seconds the motion. Is there discussion on the matter? Mr. Costello,
Just very quickly, does anyone know the history of when this entered in,
Mr.
by the
Pizer.
charter?
About, God, I think the first charter, perhaps, it was an important commission. They developed, there was PIDC and PDIC. And they had some serious money in the sixties and seventies. And basically when I stopped spending the money somewhere in the seventies or a little bit after that, the commission continued to do a few things. They had a little leftover money. And they haven't done anything in at least 25 years.
And you don't see it coming back around again, so.
Well, if it comes around again, it would be necessary to reinstitute, but it's not something that's just gonna magically appear.
Okay.
The focus has also been somewhat subsumed by the Economic Development Foundation.
So it's sort of taking its place.
Yeah.
All right, fair enough. Thank you.
Excellent. Other discussion on the matter?
Dave, hang on a second, please. What
Yeah.
section so that I can scroll there?
Keep on going. We're at 3-11.
There is no 3-11, it just says section 11.
Section 11.
It's just a header.
Yeah.
It's just below 3.9.4.
It's below 3-10-1.
Too many cooks.
Oh, I'm sorry, I did see that, thank you.
Keep on coming.
Keep on going, keep on scrolling.
Too many cooks.
Getting there.
Cooks.
There it is. Very good. Line 707. So the motion is to strike that. Rob, before you do that though, can you go click on the review button at the top, on the top ribbon?
It should be.
Is it all marked
It's
up?
on. Yup.
Perfect. Excellent. All right, so the motion was made by Mr. Pizer, seconded by Mr. Hutchinson. Any further discussion? Hearing and seeing none, I will call the roll. Mr. Bulletin?
Yes.
I'm having trouble there. All right, Miss Cavaco?
Yes,
Mr. Costello?
Yes.
Mr. Hutchinson?
Yes,
Mr. Lawler is no longer present. Mr. Levin?
Yes,
Mr. Pizer?
Yes.
Ms. Votran?
Yes,
Mr. Zubaroli?
Yes.
And I vote yes, the motion carries unanimously, 9 in favor. Excellent. Right. I still have hope that this next piece will go quickly, although, I think perhaps longer than our last discussion. So as you folks know, we met with the town manager, and the select board. And additionally, when I met with the town staff, all groups expressed, an interest in replacing the, what I've been calling the HR functions of the charter, with a more broad, section that allows, for the town manager with the approval of the select board, to, essentially determine the organization of the town. When I reviewed my notes, I looked at sections 3-8, which, cover the establishment of, in scope of the finance department. 3-9, which covers the finance director, so it would be, sorry, Rob, it's section 8 of chapter 3, so if you want to scroll up. It's different on this though.
I know,
Yeah.
roughly.
Yep, there you go. Further, section 13, which talks about the establishment of and scope of the planning and development department, and 3-15, which covers the director of planning and development. So these These sections are the ones identified by the town manager and the staff and select board as being prescriptive and constraining their ability to structure the town to meet the current needs as they exist contemporaneously. So my hope is that we could entertain a motion, and we'll certainly have discussion to replace those items with a new section 3-8, which would state the town manager may, with select board approval and subject to applicable provisions of the general or special laws, reorganize, consolidate, or abolish town agencies in whole or in part, provide for new town agencies, and when incident to such reorganization, with the approval of the advisory and finance committee, transfer all or a portion of the appropriation made for one town agency to another.
I'll make that motion.
Excellent. The motion has been made to replace sections 8, 9, 13, and 15 of chapter 3 with the language that I just expressed. That language is in your packets. Rob, do you want to pull up that language too, just so that folks who are
Sure, I'll need
viewing-
to, yep, I'm gonna stop sharing this screen and I'll have to open another one. And then when we get to this, ladies and gentlemen of the jury, please give these old fingers time to type. So, right? One cook, please, one cook.
Mr. Zuccarelli has made the motion. While he's looking to reshare, is there a second to that motion?
So say that again, what we're replacing?
Yep, so the motion would be to replace sections 8, 9, 13, and 15 with the new language, which will be
Second.
on screen in a moment. Ms. Cavaco seconds the motion. Is there discussion on the matter? Mr. Pyle?
This is simply a question. I'm assuming that this is not something that would infringe on union rights. That the reorganization, consolidation, and the abolition of town agencies doesn't imply the dismissal of employees within those agencies.
I would imagine, and I'm not an attorney, although we have one here. I would imagine that there are provisions in the negotiated contracts that would cover the abolition of a department, and we would need to find a commensurate level of employment for those folks, unless, of course, the town is eliminating.
Right, okay.
But I think the town still has the authority to eliminate positions.
Always does.
Right.
Regardless.
There is, I know there's bumping and, you know, those provisions do exist.
Yep,
Just bring it up. I'm satisfied with the answer.
yeah, I mean, again, I'm not an attorney, I don't know if you wanna say anything further, Steve.
Again, I have not reviewed the town's, all of the union contracts, but my experience in reviewing union contracts for towns is in general, this is always something that is contemplated. Employees have rights with respect to that if they are moved from one department to another, if it is a like position, that's acceptable. If it's not, there are procedures for dealing with that. So that's something the town would be aware of in making any determination. It would have to be.
Mr. Levin?
Yeah, I mean, my sense is this is consistent with our approach to get the charter out of the operation of business.
I'm in agreement.
Because basically, if you look, we were having that discussion when you weren't here with Lee. If you look at the under 3-13-2. And Alan brought that up. I mean, there's all these things, you should do this, you should do this, you should do that. This document is meant to define that department or define that role, not so much tell them how to run their day-to-day business. And I don't know anything about labor law. All I can tell you is that I would assume if any changes they would make, we just went through a reorganization that was more structural than it was moving people, except for there were a few people that moved from, you know, the management of the town, being the town manager, et cetera, and HR would take all those things into consideration.
This is like, so I'll further add that in our current charter, the town manager already has some of these rights. So there will need to be a second motion to strike that language from his job description, because this is looking at it as more of a high level collaboration between, this is a function of the executive branch rather than simply a job description item for the town manager. So I think when we get to the town manager section, we'll need to discuss whether or not we're gonna change. I mean, I think we'll end up starting, so I'll just say, under, item D of the, section 3-5-1, the town manager's powers and duties. It does say that he has the ability to establish, reorganize, consolidate, or abolish any department or position under the town manager's direction and supervision with the approval of the select board. So some of this already exists, but it's cleaning up the charter so that all of the prescriptive entries are taken out and replaced with this broader, I think more flexible clause.
I apologize. This isn't the comma. It's a semicolon. I just want to make sure I read this pretty carefully. And the "and" in the third from the bottom line, provide for new town agencies. And when incident to any such reorganization, this is a whole new thought. And I think if we were to put a semicolon after agencies, the only thing advisory and finance is doing is they're the ones dealing with the transfer of finance, of money.
So like if agency A was eliminated and agency B came in to replace it, they would transfer the appropriation from A to B.
Right, but they
Is that what you're
would,
saying?
yeah, that is what this is saying, but advisory and finance is not making a judgment as to whether agency A should exist or agency B should exist. That's the town manager's decision. And I think we just need to separate the two parts of the sentence more effectively.
So your suggestion is to add on the third line from the bottom,
Right, after the word agencies.
after the word agencies, a semicolon, Rob?
Yes.
Can we just?
Hang on one second. All right,
And take
so
a-
I have a couple of other folks, Mr. Levin.
No, I'm sorry.
Mr. Bulletin, then Ms. Votring.
Can I as well?
Yeah, I'll get you on that list.
In agreement, again, in general principle, because this is what we've been talking about. However, as we are talking about two very, in these particulars, it's a Department of Finance and the Planning and Community Development Director, both of whom have other responsibilities set forth as in the charter that we would need to address. So that's something to be concerned about. So for example, we're literally asking here, advisory and finance to transfer funds. Does advisory and finance, other than having the ability to theoretically document funds, do they have the ability to actually physically transfer any funds?
No,
Yeah.
it's just a.
That's not what this says, I don't think. This says that advisory finance approves the request to transfer. So with the approval of the advisory and finance, so the town manager, I guess, is the way this reads, the town manager transfer, but I guess all the work that happens in the staff happens at the pleasure of the town manager, so we could say the finance director shall transfer such funds, but.
Well, then we have to make sure that there is actually a position finance director
Right,
that is
right.
identified.
And
that's the problem with any of this, with putting anything in a charter, as we've always talked about, where you're right, because we could later decide that the finance director should instead be called the comptroller of the town.
Right,
And then we mess the whole thing up again because we have a different name for it.
yeah, so that's why I think if we keep it as a town manager responsibility, town manager is responsible for making the transfer happen. He can delegate that to his finance director or his comptroller or whatever the CFO type position may be for the town.
Then I question why we're getting the approval of the advisory and finance committee as opposed to an elected body like the select board.
Sure. Mr. Zuparoli, can you talk a little bit about, fund transfers that you folks already do?
So the funds, a request for funds transfer comes before us, and it could be for anything. I mean, department head comes to us with most of the time it happens for public safety. Department head, division head comes to us with a transfer funds requests. They present the hows and the whys behind that request. We discuss it, vote on it, and then once we've either approved or denied, 99% of the time that transfer request is approved. Then it goes back to the director of finance and the finance department to make sure that that happens.
So they regularly see these fund transfers. I think I think this, to me, this adds a level of transparency to, it's not just the town manager eliminating a department, creating a new one and having no public discussion about it. Of course, there'll be public discussion through the select board for those sorts of things, but it's been appropriated by town meeting based on the budget presentation. I think we can't realistically expect town meeting to come and say, all right, we want to use this now. It would essentially become free cash at the end of the fiscal year. We can't call a special town meeting in order for there to be a funds transfer of this theoretical free cash at this point. So I think we just want another like financial watchdog looking at something like this.
And I agree that makes sense. But what we have as a potential, and again, I don't, so please, Mr. Zubaroli, this is not directed at the current advisory and finance committee, so I've always told you that my role as an attorney has always been to picture doom and gloom in the future and try and create language to avoid it. So I see the potential problem 20 years down the line when we have some reason we've had a rogue finance committee created. As you've said, the purpose of this is not to have the finance committee decide whether or not they agree with the town manager's decision to reorganize a department or not. And yet, in this particular instance, if they said, well, I don't like that decision, so you know what, I'm not gonna fund the transfer, right?
And you've stopped it.
And you stop, or worse yet, we've now created a conflict. So I'm trying to avoid language that potentially creates a conflict between bodies, especially one being an appointed body, the other being the select board, which has to approve this, the elected body of the town. So that's the only reason that I have a concern, not that I disagree that someone should be looking over it, or that I think advisory and finance as a group doesn't handle these things regularly. But where it becomes a policy matter, it's a conflict in who makes a dictation on policy. So the language needed, I think, to be somewhat clearer with respect to that. And I'm just not having an ability in my head right now to see how I would phrase that. That's for my concern.
I did work with Derek on this language, and this is similar language that you see in other communities as well, where their finance committee is making such approvals. So we did do some research on this. I'm happy to change the language if this group thinks so. We'll get to that in a minute. So right now I have Martha, then Len, and I have Betty, and I think Alan wants to get on here, and I think Mr. Hutchinson.
Maybe, I was gonna agree with Steve.
Done.
You're done. You're off the list.
Larry, did you also wanna have another comment at some point?
Probably that.
All right,
We'll see what happens after you go through all the good people.
All right, Martha, you're up.
Oh, thank you.
So am I to understand that all of the sections of what the director of finance responsibilities are and everything else that it says in those sections, as well as what the Department of Finance does, and then the same thing for planning department and director of planning?
Yeah, so as an
Everything
example,
in those
yes,
That's a lot of
That's what I requested.
information.
Yes, so as an example, so in section 8, the establishment and scope of the Department of Finance, it talks about establishing finance. It talks about specific positions, the accountant, the treasurer, the collector, the assessors, and the director of data processing. We don't have one of those in town, so we're already in violation of our charter because we don't have someone.
Well, I guess that's procurement now, and that would be a good,
No, it's not.
No, it's not.
The purpose is to stop us from dictating what the position should be. It further goes on in 3-8-2 to talk about the director of finance, and it lists their job responsibilities. That is an HR function that should be in a job description that needs to be flexible to meet the challenges facing the town on any given rotation of such person. And then
so that
goes on in
is, that's
section
all
9.
considered HR?
It goes on in section 9 to further discuss the director of finance. And it gives further responsibilities. It talks about their education and training. I think the purpose of this new section is to say the charter ought not to dictate what the director of finance looks and sounds like, what their qualifications are. That's for a human resources department to decide in conjunction with the person who directs it directs and appoints that person, who would be the town manager. It talks about them being responsible for the effective operation of the Department of Finance. It talks about them coordinating the financial functions of all departments and agencies.
And that's all HR, it's all described in an HR.
This is a job description. This is not a charter provision.
It's
These are
described
job
somewhere else.
So does this, is this similar to what is in other charters, other town charters? Does not include all of this
I mean,
information?
they vary. There are some that include this language, there are some
This
that.
would be a big change. And then my second question about related to this is why isn't the Department of Public Works included?
I didn't see that in my notes. It's entirely possible that we ought to look at that as well.
Wait, or,
I came up with these sections, referencing the joint meeting that we had with the select board and the town manager.
yeah, section 6. I went through it all and was looking at the difference between the Department of Public Works employees are
Yep.
paid and they are employees. And then Board of Health is elected and that this goes on and on like that.
I mean, we can
So
certainly include, the Department of Public Works, and I apologize if I
And
missed that.
Director of Public Works, the same parallel.
Yep, I would agree with you if you'd like to
Right.
include that. If a motion goes forward, we could include in this discussion the elimination of section 16.
Well, it seems to me that it would be the
Section
same
6.
theory
Yes, I'm in agreement.
that the director and the employees, the department. And to me, it's one of the big changes that has been brought before us.
Yeah, so.
And I don't know if I'm ready to vote on it tonight.
Well, I will
and would
note
like
that
to
you
talk to
had this
other
proposal
people.
last week, so folks should do their homework in advance of these meetings.
Well, I did, I did do a lot of work, but I
So-
have not talked to other people about it.
So I will
I'll
say-
that.
If it's the pleasure of the committee to include section 6, which is the Department of Public Works, and I'm scanning here,
It's basically the same.
I don't see,
Yeah. Says you should just remove snow.
I don't see the Director of Public Works as a separate section here. Am I missing something?
Section it's
It's in there, but it's not a separate section.
Okay,
like
so
the
section
others.
6 covers both.
Yeah.
Yeah.
All right, so if we additionally wanted to include section 6, I'm amenable to that. I don't see it. I would agree that it would fit the philosophy we're putting forward here tonight, so.
So the next thing related to that is that we haven't talked about the town manager. And that again, are people thinking that all of that should be out of this charter too? for the same reason, that's an employed person. So that.
Well, the difference is that the town manager is a member of the executive branch and a manager within the executive branch versus the other departments that fall under him. The town manager is always going to exist versus these other departments may be reorganized in a way that, so.
In this form of government, town manager
Yes.
is actually a charter created position.
Not even a charter created position, not just a charter, it actually derived from general laws, so. The so our form of government is a town manager, representative town meeting, select board form of government, so. They're
Right, it's one of the
named-
three things that we can't change, actually.
We can't change,
But it's.
we can't change their tenure or their selection.
As a review committee,
Correct, it would need to go
Yeah.
through a commission and do something like that. But,
but we could change their powers and duties, is that what you're saying?
Yeah,
Yes.
yes,
couldn't make two of them.
And so we're deciding maybe not to have any of that in, we haven't talked about.
we haven't gotten to the town manager.
Yeah.
So is the motion changed?
There isn't a motion yet. Is
No,
there?
we're still in discussion.
Mrs. Zuccarelli, did you make this motion? You did.
I did, yeah. So we're in discussion about this motion. And I don't want to jump ahead of Betty. Betty's hand is up. So
Yeah, I have.
I have a couple of
so-
questions. Go to Betty. I have a couple questions.
Yep, so I have a couple of folks on here, I guess coming out of Ms. Votrain's comments. I guess the motion would need to be amended, or for your consideration, Mr. Zuccarelli, would you amend your motion to include in the list of eliminated sections, section 6, which is the Department of Public Works?
3-6. But yeah.
Section 6 of chapter 3.
Thank you.
What's the rationale behind that?
It's similarly describes the functions of such a department in a prescriptive and human resources type manner.
Okay, then I have no problem with it.
Excellent. Mrs. Cavaco, I believe you seconded the motion. Would you maintain your second in that event?
Yes. Yes.
Thank you. All right, a follow-up, Martha?
No,
Excellent. Mr. Levin?
It's back, I keep going back to this, we're trying to get out of the operations business. If you think about this, we're trying to, it's like if you look at the US government, the legislature, and I'm not saying this is legislative, they write the law. And as much as everybody likes to dump on the bureaucrats, as we call them, figure out how to implement the law and what they have to do and all the details. And I think that's what we're doing here. I wouldn't say so much it's an HR thing, but it's basically these people report to the town manager, and like any of us that work in any kind of job, we are given certain tasks to do, certain things we have to, deliverables we have to have. So I think that's what we're doing here, Martha. I think the town manager is a separate case out of this. I think the goal for this is, if you look under the Department of Public Works, it says they'll remove snow. Why is that in the charter? I mean, there's lots of things like that. There's all these little details. And as David has said, if we don't deal with these things and something changes, then, we basically, you have to come back and do it again. On another comment is about the fact that it's talking about the advisory and finance. I agree that where Larry wanted to put the semicolon, I would put a period and rewrite that whole last sentence. And I think one of the key words there is advisory. Because like you said, if you give them the authority, because basically what you're saying is you're setting up these group of people appointed by the moderator that have final word on restructuring the government, the operation of the town government.
No,
Because
that's not
they,
true.
Hang on, Rob.
Bob, if you give them the authority,
All right, let's keep things in order. Please.
if you give them the authority to, if you give them the authority to approve or disapprove the transfer, in essence, you're giving them the authority to approve or disapprove the reorganization. So you need to think about that, and I think the key word there is advisory. You know, we all have different committees we're members of, and in a lot of cases, what we are is advisory to the select board, to this, to that, or whatever. And so I think that's important, that last sentence needs some work to make sure we don't put ourselves in that bind. So I'm done.
Thank you, Mr. Levin. Rob, if you wouldn't mind editing, on the second to last line, where it says town agencies and replace the semicolon. Would you mind changing that to a period? Eliminating the word and.
I'm not,
and
I'm not,
capitalizing the word when.
But we need a subject. There's no subject.
The subject is such reorganization. The reorganization is the subject.
No, I mean, you need a subject and a verb.
When incident to any such reorganization, with the approval of the advisory and finance committee, I see.
Someone shall transfer.
The town
The
manager.
town
The
man-
transfer.
Okay,
So, all right, so in the last line, after finance committee and comma, you should write the town manager.
And it should probably shall direct the transfer.
Love it. Shall direct the. There we go.
I was very nervous about that semicolon because it didn't have a full.
No, full stop.
Okay,
You got that.
excellent. Mr. Levin, follow up?
No, I'm done. Thank you very much.
Ms. Tabacco?
so, I have three things to say. First of all, Larry, and to the whole board, in every single one of our CBAs, there is language that would, go into effect for any kind of reorg or reduction in force or anything like that. And it's still a CBA, so we would still have to follow that language.
Mhm.
Secondly, I'm not even so sure with the town manager. We should list the duties, I guess, out of all of them, that would be the only one I would be in agreement for. The charter should not discuss any kind of employment, duties, positions, that's not part of what the charter is. That is an HR function or a town manager function that reports, so I'm for, the first part of this, motion, but quite frankly, the last sentence that just changed, when incident to any such reorg with the approval of the advisory and finance committee. What if the advisory and finance committee doesn't approve it? Then what happens? I don't think
That's
you
what I
should have
said.
the advisory and finance committee in there at all. Because if they don't approve it, they then, like Mr. Levin said, the entire reorg would be rejected. So I
Yeah.
think you should take that out of there and go through the normal steps of whatever balance transfers. I mean, you have the town manager, you have the select board. The finance committee goes to the select board and suggests whatever kind of transfers they have to do. And then it's approved by the select board. The select board directs the town manager to do that. With the approval of the advisory and finance committee negates that entire section and all of that language. Because if they don't approve it, it's done.
We changed approval to guidance.
Yeah, so we can certainly change the language. I will say that, I disagree, Betty, and so does the town manager who wanted this language in here. I think we can, like, if the word approval is the concern, we could change it to guidance. We could change it with the advice of the advisory and finance committee. We could change it to anything we want, again, this is a suggestion that will go to town meeting, they'll make the final decision, but this language was requested by the town manager. So
But with the approval of the Finance and Finance Committee puts us in the hands of the Advisory and Finance Committee. I mean,
sure,
I'm
I
not,
think it's a
I'm not a
mechanism,
lawyer.
I think it's a mechanism, though, to avoid having to call a town meeting to do this. And so
It
if
could-
we don't have this mechanism, which is how balance transfers already happen in town. We will then run the risk of turf war between the town manager and town meeting. Because town meeting will want to weigh in if we don't delegate this authority to someone else.
It
Well,
shouldn't
some
say
oversight.
approval. I just don't think it should say approval, because it, in fact, I believe it does negate it. And if I were a town meeting member and this came before us for some reason, and for some reason, the Advisory and Finance Committee did not approve it, I would vote against it. Per
Don't
their
all,
recommendation.
don't all balance transfers go through the Advisory and Finance Committee already?
But, like,
How is it any different?
but this is something different. Balance
Yes.
transfers are one thing, but this is something different. This is specific to a reorg and consolidation or abolish of town agencies. Regular balance transfers are put forward by the Finance Committee. I mean, yeah, the Finance
Do you look
Director.
at changing the word budget for balance transfers?
This is a balance transfer, because
So if a department goes away, their budget will happen, are we talking about a budget or a balance transfer?
so the portion, so it's talking about the appropriations made for a.
Yes, a town meeting appropriated money to this agency.
Yep.
To this
This
account.
agency on the vote of, or the decision of 4 people goes away. If you take out the advisory and finance, but the town manager and 3 select board members gets rid of an agency.
They already have that ability.
Okay, so.
They already, yeah, they can do that already, but let's
Alright.
just say,
And
let's
there's
just
no
say,
provision
Alan,
for town meeting to weigh in on that at this time?
well,
Or are you
if
trying
it's
to
a
eliminate
balance,
that here, you give it to
He's trying to
finance?
eliminate it.
No, so, no.
no, I'm not trying to eliminate
I'm
it.
not eliminating anything. I'm eliminating the human resources prescriptive language in the charter that tells us what the finance department should be doing. And we're adding a clarification as to how a reorganization takes place in town.
I
I
have
have
no
some-
issue with the language of the reorganization, except for the fact, and we should change it, because if the Advisory and Finance Committee doesn't get the approval, or we don't get the approval from the Advisory and Finance Committee, this whole administration organization is dead. Because it says right there, with when incident to any such reorg, with the approval of the Advisory and Finance Committee and the town manager shall direct. It's specific. So if they say they're not going to approve a balance transfer for this particular purpose, then the entire section is dead and the town manager will not be able to do a reorg. Or
Right, but in that
abolish an
case,
agency.
in that case, it forces a town meeting, for us to make that decision.
Yeah.
So the town manager's not gonna say, oh, well, shit, we tried, pardon my language, we tried. He's gonna move on and say, all right, well, since the Advisory and Finance Committee has said, no, we're gonna call a town meeting and we're gonna reappropriate these funds.
Right, can I just?
Nope, I haven't. Betty, do you have a follow-up?
I will not be supporting this with that language in.
Okay, the town manager would like for you to support it. Alan, I know you're up next.
No, I'm all set, I guess I got to say my piece, thank you.
Larry, you're next.
Okay, pretty easy, I think. Advisory and Finance already has the power to make transfers.
Yes.
We are simply saying, this is a large amount of money that might go through. but that's not different from what we've done in the past. I know from my experience in town government as a bureaucrat, that hundreds of thousands and millions of dollars can get transferred. The finance director would come to me and say, do you have any money? We need to give money to this department and we need to make, it has to be a balance because the tax rate's already been set. That's point number one. And therefore, I don't have a discomfort with advisory and finance being part of it. Number two, what you say about town meeting, to flesh it out, at the next town meeting or the next April town meeting, when we set the budget, if the town meeting isn't really feeling good about what the advisory and finance committee has done or what the town manager has done, they can raise or lower the appropriations for each department. So if he's, the town manager or whatever has taken one of the functions of planning and put it in inspectional services, and town meeting doesn't like it, they can take the $850,000 and take it out of one budget and put it in the other budget, either supporting or refuting what the town manager has done. Don't expect this to happen. But the fear that advisory and finance can eliminate, eliminate the reorganization, all they can do is postpone until town meeting comes. And I think that the idea of having someone in finance overseeing finance is a good one. So I'm satisfied with this one.
Thank you. Mr. Zubaroli, I saw you on my list as well. And then I have Mr. Levin and Mr. Bolton.
Thanks. First of all, the Advisory and Finance Committee doesn't have nearly as much power as everyone seems to think it has. Right there in advisory, it's right there. We can approve funds transfer requests. We approve funds transfer requests. We do our work with the budget, but the amount of power and authority, I think people are giving ANF a little too much power right now, just by virtue of the way the conversation is going. And Dave, this is my question. This is a question for you.
Yep.
Has the town manager and or town council seen this language?
Yeah, I work directly with the town manager on this.
And I have no problem with this. It's if the town manager has no problem with it, then I fail to see the issue or issues.
I agree, and that's my point exactly.
So can we move the question?
I do have two more people. I think I'm happy to move the question. Well, are you moving the question?
Yes, I'm moving the question.
Well, I want to revisit the motion because Rob, the language has changed. Would you still motion to replace sections 8, 9, 13, 15, and 6 of chapter 3 with this new amended language?
Yes.
Excellent. Ms. Cavaco, would you maintain your second?
For discussion.
Excellent. All right. So the amended motion is accepted at this point. I'm gonna let Mr. Levin and Mr. Bolton speak, because they're our last two on the list, since it's kind of a new motion at this point. And I think we can move, if there are additional points or reiterations, please refrain, hold them back. Mr. Levin.
This is not a budget transfer. To me, a budget transfer is when you go in and you need to take the money out of a free cash, let's say, to pay for the budget for snow removal is always underfunded, so we need to move money to pay for the cost of removing snow. Those kinds of those are transfers. This, in my mind, is not a transfer. It's basically taking money that was in account A, and now that because you combine the departments, it becomes account A plus B, and maybe it's a whole new account number. And I agree with Betty that the word approval, in my opinion, is a little too strong. I understand why I think Derek wants this, because he wants to make sure people feel like that there's nothing being done under the table. He wants people to be able to see that there's some transparency. He wants there to be able to be some discussion by somebody else beside the select board. Spread the pain, if there is pain with it. So I'm proposing that the word approval be changed to the word review. That it's meant to be a discussion, because I agree with Betty, if you don't do this, then they have the potential to, again, start micromanaging this committee that's appointed by a third party to micromanage the way the town's government is organized and run every day. We just had that with the reorganization of the town committee. Did the A&F agree to move the money that was used for the harbor master from whatever budget line that was in over to the police department's budget? Did they do that? I think they did, and they approved it, and that's fine that that's what they did. But as Steve said, and it's the old saying is you don't plan for success, you plan for failure. When they sent the rocket to the moon, they didn't plan for success, they planned for failure. They happen to have success. And I agree with that. And so I think that that's a little bit concerning. If the town meeting doesn't agree with this reorganization, they can bring warrants and deal with part of the budget discussion because they think that they're trying to. But then again, that's where we now will politicize the running of the town of government, politicize other people that we've elected and hired to do a job and pay them good money. And so I suggest that we change the word from approval to review.
Well, it's Mr. Grohl's motion, so I'll let him weigh on this. So what I will say though is, if we change it to review, what is the action step that happens along with that? One of the main concerns expressed under the last charter commission's proposal was that, as an example, the planning board was having to review any type of development application in town. That review then resulted in nothing.
Well,
What does the review do?
it reviewed, it basically, there's another opportunity for people to see that it was discussed, other people to bring their opinions and ideas to this process. And that's what their advisory, we're trying to use the advisory function of this committee to be advisory, not just purely financial. I understand what went on with the planning board, all that, there was a whole different agenda there with this. The last thing is that I will say is, you know, when you say this is words that Derek, you work with Derek on this, you know, you do it the first time and, you know, you get other eyes on it and you go, oh, well, maybe this is what could happen. And maybe, you know, it wasn't. This is an evolutionary step. This is not just a light switch.
Sure. Yeah, you know, I understand that, and I hope you've seen that. I've been open to language
That's right.
changes here as part of this, even just this section. I think the approval piece is critical, because what happens if the advisory and finance committee reviews and says, Derek, we don't think you should do this, and then Derek still does it? You create a whole other kettle of fish.
You create a kettle of fish anyway. The other way you go, you're gonna create a kettle. You're gonna be in the kettle of fish.
But again, the advisory and finance committee already has the ability to approve balance transfers and budget transfers, so.
Let me just say one other thing. So I hear what you're saying. So.
This is just an issue of scale.
I understand that. So what you're doing is we're giving them a stick to stir the kettle as opposed to the valve to turn the gas on. Does that make sense?
I'm not sure I follow.
So basically, by saying review, they get to kind of stir the soup. right? They get to kind of stir, it, maybe put a little salt in it. If you give them approval, they get to turn the burner off to the fish, the soup, and the soup just turns into a glutinous mass.
I don't agree with that. They
Well,
can,
that's-
they can turn the gas down maybe, but again,
Well, if you give them approval,
town
then,
meeting can go back and overrule that.
I know, but you're basically giving them with approval. You're not just letting them turn it down, you're letting them turn it off or on, become a
No,
light switch.
I don't agree with that.
Okay.
It's a dimmer, that's,
Okay,
is how I see it, and to use your,
okay.
your analogy, hold on, Mr. Zuccaroli, would you amend your motion to take out the word approval and put in something less, powerful?
No,
Okay, so then we'll move on, Mr. Bolton.
I'm trying to understand, given what we've all talked about, what the purpose of the A and F review is. I was, at one point, the phrase was, well, they're the ones who have to do this because that's how we do that. That sounds to me like a ministerial function. This is the way we do it because this is how balance transfers occur. If that's a ministerial function, then that's something different than they're making any sort of substantive determination. So the question I have for the motion maker, for whoever is, what are we trying to accomplish with that? Because if what we are trying to accomplish is a ministerial transfer, we can do that by just simply taking out discretion. If instead what we're saying is we actually want somebody else to review this, substantively review whether or not they agree with the reorganization, and then decide, well, I'm gonna agree or disagree, and I'm gonna withhold the funds if I disagree, and I'm gonna hijack this until the next town meeting, then that's a very different story. So I'm trying to understand which of those two, because I got, those are two different scenarios that came out during our discussion, and I don't know which one we were planning for, if both of them or not. Because I have less of a concern with the former, much more of a concern with the latter. Not because I have a concern necessarily that someone shouldn't be reviewing decisions to eliminate a department. That is something that probably should be reviewed. But at the same time, if that's something the town has planned for, then it should be able to execute what it needs to do and have it reviewed at another time, rather than bring the town to gridlock because we have a dispute between two bodies.
Sure. So I guess, so. I hear that. How would we restrict discretion in this case?
Well, that's an easy one. The advisory and finance committee shall approve the transfer and the town manager shall effectuate it. You take away discretion, there's no discretion.
It's no for me to.
It is now a ministerial function. If the purpose, however, is not to just merely effectuate something that has been decided, but to have somebody review it, then that's another story. In which case, then I'm fine with that. But as well, I then question whether or not it's A and F that should be reviewing a governmental decision to change a department. And I'm not saying no, I'm merely asking, is that what we want to do?
So right now, and again, I think our problem is, we are talking about a scale issue. Like right now, if one of the staff members in the town clerk's office, the assistant town clerk, if that position was eliminated, Derek and the select board can already reorganize that department to have 2 additional clerk level staff members. They could go to, well, I guess this is not a great example because it's interdepartmental, but if there were 2 clerks eliminated from the town clerk's office, and we needed an additional clerk in the assessor's office, the town manager can already make that decision. And advisory and finance still needs to make that budget transfer, that item transfer, in order to fund the position. Instead of us looking at just a single position, though, we're talking about the departmental level.
Right.
So I think we're getting in our own way here tonight. It's already the process, we're just describing it more in this particular section.
You know,
Why
we
can't we
could,
just leave it out?
we could certainly leave it out,
Yep.
but, then if that's the
Cause it's
case.
like going on already, it sounds like.
That occurred to me, but I think if we're gonna be consistent, with, Mr. Bolton's, premise. I mean, leaving it out is just playing with words, because then. It is necessary for advisory and finance, and by the way, the advisory is separate from finance, the advisory is
It's nothing to do
advising
with the
on.
money.
On.
Other non-financial articles.
Articles.
Okay.
And finance is their financial part, but, they already do this, and if we leave it out, they will do it. I mean, I think that what Mr. Zubaroli was saying was the likelihood of advisory and finance going against the town manager and exercising their authority is unlikely. But I don't want to eliminate the advisory and finance committee's ability to control in the middle of the year transfers from one entity to another entity. But if we're going to, then let's get them out of the business entirely. So if he's going to reorganize and it's necessary to put funds from one place to another place, and the method that we have established is that advisory and finance votes to do that. Let's do it, or let's take it away from advisory and finance entirely.
Well, so I don't think we ought to do that.
You missed a Bob question for me.
Mrs. Zubarelli, there's a question for you from Mr. Levin.
Well, when the
I
reorganization.
I would just like to remind, excuse me, I would just like to remind you that I've moved the question. And we've been going around in this for another
Yeah.
20.
There was a new motion.
Because the motion was amended, I continued the discussion. I will certainly give you the floor after Mr. Levin, and you are more than welcome to move the question.
I think you're uniquely in position to answer this question. It may resolve it. So when the reorganization went on before, and for example, the harbor master went out of environmental, right? And then it went into the police. Did you guys vote to move that funding for the harbor master from the environmental department to the police department?
It was a line item transfer, yep.
And you remember having a vote on that? You guys discussed it and voted it to move it?
Of course we did.
Okay, I'm just asking. I don't know. I wasn't there. I didn't pay attention. And then I mean, that's what they did. So I don't know. Do you put your eggs in that basket? And
Rob, I'm gonna give you the floor in just a second. One final question. Would you remove the final sentence from your motion?
Would I remove the final sentence? When incident to any such reorganization with the approval of the Advisory and Finance Committee, the town manager shall direct the transfer all or a portion of the appropriation made for one town agency to another. Dave, are you talking about that?
Yep.
I'm going to answer your question with a question. Did the town manager approve this language?
Yes.
Then no, I won't remove the sentence.
Excellent. Mr. Zubarelli, the floor is yours.
Move the question.
All right, I will take the roll call at this point. We are now voting on the amended motion, which is to replace sections 6, 8, 9, 13, and 15 of chapter 3 with the language on the screen now, which reads: the town manager may, with select board approval and subject to the applicable provisions of general or special laws, reorganize, consolidate, or abolish town agencies in whole or in part, provide for new town agencies. Or,
Yeah, nice job there.
it should say, or provide for new town
yeah,
agencies.
or provide.
The town manager may with the select board approval and
And then
subject.
the total. Oh, don't say it.
Organize, consolidate, or abolish town agencies in whole or in part, provide for new town agencies, period.
Well, yeah, I should say, or provide for new town agencies. Hold on.
Yeah.
No, he doesn't. It's in the motion. He doesn't need. All right. Having added that, or I assume you maintain your motion, Mr. Zuccarelli.
Yep.
Ms. Cavaco, I assume you maintain your second so that we can take the vote.
She said no. she wouldn't.
For more discussion.
She wants more discussion though.
Is there further discussion?
There is, I have a question
Go ahead.
and a comment. Steve, I'm gonna ask you to put your legal ease hat on for a moment for me, please.
Okay.
When you look at this language of the last section, when incident to any such reorg, with the approval of the advisory and finance committee, the town manager shall direct the transfer. Does that language, if there is no approval of the advisory and finance committee, and I'm not talking about, you know, the unlikeliness and all that, we're just talking facts. Would you be able to claim that without the approval of the advisory and finance committee, that that entire section would be null and void and we would have to wait for a new town meeting to bring it up again? I mean, what I'm saying is, with that approval language of the advisory and finance committee, if they did not approve it, would this whole section be dead? Except for going to another town meeting and being even more less effective than already.
It would inhibit any operation that required the change in finance. So in other words, if there was still money in the budget, they could operate until they ran out of money in the budget. But it wouldn't prevent the reorganization, but it would prevent the funding beyond what already existed. That's the legal answer.
So if they did not approve the reorg, let's just say they did not approve the reorg or abolish a town agency, right?
They can't stop.
And there
that.
was no money left. If the advisory and finance committee didn't approve this, that would be dead. It would be dead until such time that you'd have to go to town meeting.
Abolishing an agency, no, because that just means the money that was originally allocated for that agency would be sitting out there unused. Transferring people from one department to another, one agency to another, if you don't transfer their salaries and there isn't money in the budget for them in the new agency, then yes, that would create a problem, and that would mean that they could not go ahead and do it. Well, they could do it, but they would literally run out of funding and probably be in violation of their union contract, because you'd have to come up with an emergency allocation, another way to pay for those people, because you can't
Right.
stop paying, obviously.
And all that would result in, at the end of there would just need to be an end of year transfer, like the town manager would still move forward. And there would just be an end of year transfer rather than an at the moment transfer, so a budget in the town clerk's office because they've added staff, may run at a deficit until the end of the fiscal year, at which point in time, there are mechanisms in place for the town to do budget transfers across departments, so this is in no way can the advisory and finance committee stop a reorganization. They can't stop the establishment of a new agency. That's not their authority. Their authority is to move money around. That's it. And at the end of the year, if the town has moved forward with the reorganization and the money hasn't been dealt with by a transfer mid-year, it will be dealt with an end of year transfer.
Yeah, but that's not, to me, that's not what the language is saying. And I would actually, I mean, obviously we have Steve's, I mean, did town council weigh in on this language or was it just you and Derek?
I don't know if the town manager shared this with the town council.
So like I said, I liked Larry's language for review, but I believe that legally it would hinder what the point of it all was.
Mrs. Zuccarelli,
Move the question.
Mr. Bulletin? Yes. Yes, excellent. Mr. Hamlin's not present. Ms. Cavaco?
No,
Mr. Costello?
No,
Mr. Hutchinson?
No,
Mr. Lawler is not present. Mr. Levin?
Yes.
Mr. Pizer?
Yes,
Ms. Boeckrey?
Yes,
Mr. Zuccarelli?
Yes.
And I vote yes. The yeses have it, at a vote of 6 in favor and 3 opposed. I'm gonna ask for a motion to table section 3, since we started a lengthy discussion at our last meeting on this section, and I don't want to truncate decision tonight, the discussion tonight. Is there such a motion?
Motion.
Listen, you don't all jump at the same time. I heard Mr. Bolton first. Mrs. Zuccarelli, will you second the motion?
Yes.
All right, excellent. Assuming there's no discussion, I will call the roll. Mr. Bolton?
Yes.
Mr. Hamlin is not present. Ms. Cavaco?
yes,
yeah. What are we doing right now?
We're voting to table the remaining discussion items, which is just chapter 3, section 3, the appointments of the select board. Mr. Costello?
yes,
Mr. Hutchinson?
Yes,
Mr. Lawler is not present. Mr. Levin?
Yes.
Mr. Pizer?
yes.
Ms. Boeckrey?
yes.
Mr. Zuccarelli?
Yes.
And I will vote no, as I always do. All right, the yeses have it. I have a couple of quick announcements, well, just really one quick announcement. Under old business, at our last meeting, we had a lengthy discussion about whether or not we should include a salary line in the charter for select board members. I subsequently met with both the town clerk and town council to discuss the matter, and I've already informed the folks who were willing to act as a working group on this. But I wanted to inform the rest of the committee that the way that the general law is structured, town meeting has to vote on the salaries of all elected officials every year, so we can't include this as a charter item. Thank you to those folks who volunteered to look into it, but we will not pursue that any further. Is there any additional new business?
Yeah, well, it's gonna be old business.
Just what-
You
I don't
just
see
skip by
any-
old
I
business.
don't see any new business, any old business.
Yeah,
Mr.
okay.
Pizer.
I simply wanted to report that there has been motion forward on the handbook matter and on whatever it is, 2-5-3. So, I will let you know when there's enough that you can put us on the agenda.
Excellent. The only other piece of old business that I have is, we, are scheduled to meet again next week. Do we want to do it in person or via Zoom?
Person.
Yeah, that's fine with me.
Anyone who prefers Zoom, other than the folks who are on Zoom?
I have to be on Zoom next week.
Okay. Is anyone opposed to doing an in-person meeting, and we will also have the Zoom component? Excellent. We will plan to meet in person.
Okay.
Folks who aren't available to be in person, certainly join us via Zoom. Otherwise, if you have other commitments, that is fine too. We do have very capable alternates to join us. Any other old business?
I have a piece.
Mr. Levin?
So is there I had asked through Robert and he deferred it to you. Is there any chance of us getting the charter where it is today? Did we do it in renumbering? Is that happening?
We haven't done renumbering. I just finished working on combining the multiple documents that we had working towards a single review charter. We're gonna need to add this language in, obviously, Rob, under your edits. Rob will this week update me after he's able to do that. And I can share out our current work where it stands after that.
You know, that matches this, that'll help us, it'll help me personally.
Yep, we can do that.
I found out that the one that I have in here is somehow it's missing half of it. I don't know what happened.
Any other old business?
No?
Hearing none, and without objection, I will call the meeting adjourned.